Before I get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the worst thing a family member has ever used against you? Because what happened to me still keeps me up some nights. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. I knew what was inside. My grandmother's lawyer had called me twice, left 2 voicemails I'd listened to standing in the parking lot of the grocery store in Mississauga where I worked part-time. I'd been bagging someone's President's Choice items and my phone buzzed in my apron pocket, and I just knew. The way you know when something is about to change, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. My grandmother had passed away in October, just after Thanksgiving. She was 81. She'd lived in the same house in Hamilton her whole adult life, a 2-story on a quiet street near the escarpment, the kind of neighborhood where the maple trees are old enough that their roots crack the sidewalks and nobody complains about it. I'd spent half my childhood in that house, every summer until I was 14. I knew every creaky stair, every drawer that stuck, the specific smell of the hallway in winter when the radiators kicked on. She left the house to me, not to my mother, not to my uncle, to me. I didn't find out until I opened that envelope. I should explain something about my family before I go any further, because none of what happened next makes sense without it. My mother is the oldest of 3. Then there's my uncle, who everyone calls by his middle name, who lives 40 minutes away in Burlington and has made a career out of being the favorite son. Then there's my aunt, who moved to Vancouver years ago and mostly exists in our family as a voice on speakerphone at Christmas. My mother and my uncle have never gotten along. Not really, not in any way that you'd call functional, but they were united in one thing, my grandmother's house. That house was worth somewhere around $800,000 in that market, maybe more. Hamilton real estate had been climbing for years, and even with everything that came after, that number sat in all of our minds like a stone. My grandmother never talked about money. She talked about gardens and bread and the CBC and her late husband, my grandfather, who died when I was 4. But she must have thought about it carefully. She must have sat with her lawyer, a quiet man named Mr. Osei whose office was above a pharmacy on King Street, and made a decision. She chose me. I was 27 when that envelope arrived. I was renting a 1-bedroom in Mississauga with a radiator that leaked and a landlord who texted back in 3 to 5 business days. I was working part-time at the grocery store, and part-time doing data entry for a small accounting firm. I was not doing badly exactly, but I was not doing well. I was surviving with a lot of effort and not much to show for it. My mother called me the same day the lawyer did, which told me she already knew. She didn't ask how I was doing. She said, "We need to talk about the house." I told her I hadn't opened the envelope yet. That was a lie. The thing about growing up in my family is that I learned early to keep my cards very close to my chest. My mother loves me. I want to be clear about that. I believe it. But she has always had a way of loving me that felt like management, like I was a project she was running. She tracked my grades, my friendships, my weight, my choices. When I got into Ryerson for communications and then quietly withdrew after first year because I was drowning, she took it personally. When I started dating someone she didn't approve of, he was perfectly kind, she just didn't like his family. She made every dinner uncomfortable until I ended it. She didn't shout, she didn't have to. She just created an atmosphere. I moved to Mississauga partly because it was affordable, and partly because it was 45 minutes away from the house I grew up in, which was enough distance to breathe. My uncle was different. My uncle shouted. He'd always been the kind of man who filled a room by volume. He had opinions about everything, politics, real estate, your life choices, and he shared them freely. He'd done well for himself. He had a house in Burlington, a successful contracting business, a truck that he washed every Sunday. He also had a very particular relationship with my grandmother's memory that involved, primarily, what she was worth and to whom. When I was growing up, the adults in my family talked about my grandmother's house, the way some families talk about an inheritance in a will that hasn't been read yet. A kind of hovering, unspoken accounting that everyone pretended wasn't happening. My uncle made improvements to the house over the years. A new deck. A finished basement. He brought this up often. He'd invested in that house, was how he put it, as though labor exchange for future equity was a thing my grandmother had agreed to. She hadn't. I know this because she told me once, when I was maybe 19, and visiting her on a long weekend, sitting at her kitchen table eating toast with the kind of thick-cut orange marmalade she always had. She said, "Your uncle thinks he's buying something from me. He's not. I never asked him to do any of that." She said it matter-of-factly the way she said most things. Then she offered me more toast. I thought about that conversation a lot after I opened the envelope. The call from my mother turned into a dinner, which turned into what I can only describe as a family tribunal, held in my uncle's Burlington living room on a Tuesday evening in November. I drove there after my shift, still wearing my grocery store fleece, which I think they both noticed. My uncle was already in position when I arrived, standing near the kitchen island, arms crossed, wearing the expression he wore when he was about to negotiate. My mother was on the couch. There was no offer of tea or anything to eat, which in our family meant things were serious. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You know this isn't right," he said. She wasn't thinking clearly at the end. Anyone could see that. I sat down on the chair across from my mother and set my bag on the floor. "Her lawyer filed everything properly," I said. "The will was witnessed. It was notarized." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." My mother leaned forward. "Nobody is saying the will isn't legal. We're saying this isn't what she would have wanted if she'd been in her right mind. You were her favorite, yes. But a house? That's a family asset. That belongs to all of us." I looked at her for a moment. "She left it to me. She was grieving," my uncle said. He meant my grandfather, who had been dead for 23 years. "She made emotional decisions. Toward the end, she was confused. She had a full cognitive assessment in September," I said. "Her doctor cleared her. It's in the file." There was a silence. "I put a new deck on that house," he said. "I know. I redid the basement. I put in probably $40,000 of work over the years. I know. And she leaves it to you. 27 years old. You can't even keep a steady job." I didn't say anything to that. I'd learned a long time ago that responding to certain things only extended them. My mother tried a different approach. She talked about fairness, about what my grandmother would have wanted for the family, about the importance of not letting money divide us. She used the word "we" a lot. She said she was worried about me, that owning a house like that at my age, in my situation, would be overwhelming. She said she thought I might want to consider splitting the proceeds 3 ways, being sensible about it. I listened to all of it. Then my uncle leaned toward me and said something that I have thought about every day since. He said, "You want to keep this house? Fine, but you'll do it without this family. I'll make sure of that. You take that house and we're done with you. You understand?" He meant it. I could see it in the way he said it. He was certain I would fold. I picked up my bag from the floor. I said, "Okay." He blinked. "Okay what?" "Okay," I said. "I understand." I put on my coat. I thanked them for having me over and I left. I cried in the car for about 20 minutes in a Tim Hortons parking lot on the way back to Mississauga. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a clean exit. I wasn't composed. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, and I cried the way you cry when you realize something has been broken for a long time, and you've just finally stopped pretending it wasn't. Then I drove home. Here's the thing about surviving on very little for a long time. You learn to think clearly when you're scared. The fear doesn't paralyze you. It focuses you. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the envelope in front of me, and I thought about what I actually wanted. I didn't particularly want to live in Hamilton. That wasn't the point. The house was on a quiet street near the escarpment, and it was worth close to $1 million, and my grandmother had left it to me, specifically, with her whole mind intact. And she had a reason for that. I thought about calling Mr. O.C. the lawyer, and I thought about calling a real estate agent, and then I thought, not yet. Not until I understand all of it. I made a list. It's a thing I do when I'm overwhelmed. I make lists on the backs of envelopes or receipts or whatever paper is nearby. I wrote down everything I knew: the house, the value, the will, my uncle's verbal threat, my mother's silence when he made it. Then I wrote one more thing at the bottom of the list: she chose you. Over the following weeks, I met with Mr. O.C. twice. He was careful and patient and explained everything twice when I needed him to. My grandmother had made the will 4 years earlier, updated it once 2 years ago, and had been assessed by her doctor in September at my grandmother's doctor's recommendation. There was no basis for a challenge. The will was clean. I also spoke with a real estate agent, a woman from a firm in Hamilton who came highly recommended and who walked through the house with me on a gray December afternoon. The maple in the front yard had lost all its leaves. The house smelled the way it always had, that specific radiator and wood smell that I hadn't been able to describe to anyone who hadn't been inside it. She told me the house would likely sell between $800,000 and $850,000 in spring. I stood in the kitchen where my grandmother and I had eaten toast with orange marmalade, and I thought, what would she have wanted? I knew the answer. She'd told me, in her way, that last summer when she showed me where she kept her important papers, a lockbox in the closet in the second bedroom, and said, "You'll know what to do with all of this when the time comes. Not your mother, not your uncle. You." I listed the house in February. By March, it had sold. My uncle found out through my mother, who found out through Mr. Ocy's office, when they contacted her regarding some minor estate paperwork. She called me the night she found out. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had leftovers on the stove. She didn't shout, which was somehow worse. She said, "You sold it," I said, "without even telling us. It was mine to sell." There was a long silence. Then she said, "You know what you've done." I said, "I know what I've done." Another silence. "Your uncle is talking about a lawyer. He can talk to a lawyer," I said. "The will was clean. Mr. Ocy will tell him the same thing he told me." I heard her breathing. I heard the sound of her house, the television somewhere in the background, the same television that had always been on at low volume in every house she'd ever lived in. She said, "I don't understand you." I said, "I know." She hung up. My uncle did consult a lawyer. The lawyer told him what Mr. Ocy and I already knew. There was no grounds for a challenge. My grandmother had been of sound mind. The will was properly executed. The verbal contributions he'd made to the property over the years, absent any written agreement, had no legal standing as a claim on the estate. I received one more call from him about 2 weeks after that. He told me I was selfish, that I was a child, that my grandmother had made a mistake and I had exploited it. He told me I would regret this when I needed family and had none. I listened to all of it. When he was finished, I said, "I hope you're doing okay," and hung up. I don't know if that was the right thing to say, but it was true. I do hope he's okay. I hope my mother is okay. I think about them more than I probably should. Here's what I did with the money, because I know you're wondering. After taxes, legal fees, the real estate commission, and everything else, I walked away with just under $600,000. In Canada, the principal residence exemption meant the capital gain situation was more straightforward than I'd feared. Mr. Ocy had explained all of this early on. I put most of it into a mix of index funds and a high-interest savings account at my credit union while I figured out next steps. I kept enough liquid to pay off my student debt, $42,000 that I'd been making minimum payments on for years, and to put down on a small place of my own, a 2-bedroom condo in Hamilton, closer to the escarpment than I expected to end up. I kept one thing from the house, a small ceramic dish from the kitchen windowsill, where my grandmother always kept a few coins, and a spare key, and whatever else she'd emptied from her pockets at the end of the day. It's sitting on my windowsill now, same spot. I want to tell you something about the year since all of this happened, because this is the part that doesn't get talked about. People assume that when you make a decision like this, when you choose yourself over keeping the peace, you feel good about it. Clean, vindicated. And sometimes I do. There are mornings when I make coffee in my own kitchen, and look out at the street and feel something that is close to peace. But there are also nights when I think about my mother's voice on the phone. The flatness in it, the way she said, "I don't understand you." And I feel something I can only call grief. Not regret. Grief. Those are different things, and it took me a while to understand that. My grandmother understood something about me that my mother and my uncle never did. She saw that I was someone who would be steady when steadiness was hard. She saw that I would not squander something given to me. She saw that I was worth betting on. I never wanted the house. I wanted someone to believe in me that clearly. She did, and I'm trying to honor that.